Sergeant Marcus Reed had been having a perfectly normal day until the ground decided to split open and swallow half the marketplace. The seismic event hit Kepler Prime without warning, turning the planet's busiest trading district into a maze of chasms and collapsed buildings. Marcus and his squad had been conducting a routine patrol through the neutral zone when the first tremor knocked him off his feet. What the hell was that? Private Chen shouted over the rumbling that seemed to come from the planet's core itself. Tectonic shift, Marcus called back, checking his scanner readings. Big one. Looks like the fault line under the commercial district just gave way. That's when he heard the screaming. Marcus had been a combat medic for 8 years, long enough to distinguish between different types of panic. This wasn't the sharp terror of combat or the controlled urgency of medical emergency. This was the sound of people watching death approach with mathematical certainty and absolutely no way to stop it. He followed the sound through the settling dust and debris until he reached what had been Sector 7's main transport hub. Where a bustling intersection had stood an hour ago, there was now a sinkhole roughly the size of a city block, and teetering on the edge, held up only by a twisted piece of rebar and what appeared to be a parking meter, was a Zephyrian passenger transport. "Marcus, we need to regroup with the main force," Corporal Martinez said through his comm. "Command wants all squads to fall back to the embassy district." Marcus was already pulling repelling gear from his pack. "Negative. There are civilians in that transport. Sir, that vehicle is going to fall any second. There's nothing we can do." "There's always something we can do." Marcus secured his line to the nearest stable structure, which happened to be a statue of some Zephyrian historical figure who probably never expected to serve as emergency rescue equipment. "Give me 5 minutes." "Marcus, that's in order." "Court-martial me later, Martinez. People are dying now." Marcus rappelled down the side of the sinkhole, trying not to think about how far down it went or how unstable everything looked. The transport was making ominous creaking sounds that suggested its structural integrity was more of a suggestion than a reality at this point. Through the vehicle's transparent aluminum windows, he could see at least 6 Zephyrian passengers, including what appeared to be an elderly female who was clearly in distress. Zephyrians aged differently than humans, but even across species lines, Marcus could recognize the fragility of advanced years and the fear in her large silver eyes. "Hello in there," he called, activating his universal translator. "I'm here to help. Can anyone move?" "The grandmother is trapped," came a shaky response in accented English. "Her restraint system is damaged. We cannot free her without causing the vehicle to shift." Marcus assessed the situation with the cold calculation that had kept him alive through 3 interplanetary conflicts. The transport was balanced on maybe 30 seconds worth of structural integrity. If he tried to extract all the passengers, the weight redistribution would send everyone into the abyss. But if he could stabilize the vehicle long enough to get the trapped woman out, "Everyone except the grandmother move to the rear of the transport," he instructed. "Slowly, don't shift your weight suddenly." Using his emergency grappling kit, Marcus managed to secure additional support lines to the transport's frame. It wasn't much, but it might buy him the time he needed. The other passengers had moved back, which had actually improved the vehicle's balance slightly. "I'm coming in," Marcus announced, though he wasn't entirely sure how he was going to manage that without making everything worse. He squeezed through a partially opened window, trying to distribute his weight carefully. The elderly Zephyrian woman looked at him with a mixture of hope and resignation that reminded him uncomfortably of his own grandmother during her final illness. "Hello there," he said gently, examining the twisted restraint system that had her pinned. "I'm Marcus. What's your name?" "Silandra," she whispered, her voice musical even in distress. Are you going to die trying to save an old woman?" "Not planning on it. My squad leader already wants to court-martial me for being here. Dying would just give him more paperwork." Despite everything, she made a sound that might have been laughter. "Humans, You joke when facing death. It's either joke or panic, and panic doesn't help anyone. Marcus was working on the restraint mechanism, which seemed to have been designed by someone who really enjoyed needless complexity. Almost got it. The transport groaned and shifted slightly. Several chunks of debris fell past the windows. "Leave me," Cylindra said quietly. "Save yourself. I have lived long enough." "Sorry, can't do that. My medical oath specifically prohibits abandoning patients just because they're being pessimistic." With a final metallic snap, the restraint system released. Marcus gathered the surprisingly light Zephyrian woman in his arms and activated his repelling gear. "Hold on tight," he said. "This is going to be interesting." They made it approximately halfway up the sinkhole wall before the transport finally gave up its fight with gravity and plummeted into the darkness below. The sound of metal being crushed echoed up from the depths for several long seconds. "Well," Marcus said, still climbing with Cylindra clinging to him, "that was cutting it close even by my standards." When they reached the surface, Marcus was surprised to find that news of the rescue had already spread. A crowd of both humans and Zephyrians had gathered, including several individuals in elaborate robes who were clearly important by someone's standards. As Marcus set Cylindra down gently, she gripped his arm with surprising strength and spoke rapidly in Zephyrian dialect. His translator was having trouble with what seemed to be very formal, ceremonial language. "She's saying something about life debt and clan honor," one of the robed figures translated, bowing deeply to Marcus. "Elder Cylindra wishes to express her profound gratitude for your courage." "It's nothing," Marcus said, checking Cylindra for injuries. "Anyone would have done the same." The translator exchanged glances with the other robed figures. "No, Sergeant Reed, not anyone would have risked their life for an elderly alien. Your actions today honor both our species." Marcus helped Cylindra to a medical transport, where human and Zephyrian medics were working together to treat the other survivors. As she was being loaded onto a stretcher, she gripped his hand one more time and spoke directly to him in careful, accented English. "You have given me years I thought were lost, young warrior. My family will not forget this gift." "Just get better," Marcus said. "That's all the thanks I need." As the medical transport departed, Marcus rejoined his squad, who had been watching the entire rescue with expressions ranging from admiration to exasperation. "You know you're completely insane, right?" Martinez said. "So I've been told. Did I miss anything important while I was playing Cave Rescue?" "Just the part where you apparently saved one of the most influential political figures in the Zephyrian Confederation," Chen said, consulting his data pad. "Elder Cylindra of House Velthara. She's basically alien royalty." Marcus watched the medical transport disappear into the distance. "Great. I'm sure that won't complicate anything." He had no idea how right he was. Marcus was replacing a power coupling in the embassy's communication array when the sky turned purple with Zephyrian ships. Not just one or two diplomatic vessels, but an entire ceremonial fleet that made the human defense satellites look like toys by comparison. "Reed, get to the command center now," came Lieutenant Morrison's voice through his comm, carrying the special tone officers used when they were trying very hard not to panic. "We've got a situation." Marcus found the embassy in barely controlled chaos. Diplomats were running around with the frantic energy of people who knew something important was happening, but had no idea what. Ambassador Chen, no relation to Private Chen, just humanity's apparent obsession with that particular surname, was standing in front of the main display looking like someone had just told him his retirement fund had been invested in Ponzi schemes. "Ah, Sergeant Reed," the ambassador said with forced calm, "we have a rather unusual situation developing." On the main screen, Marcus could see the lead Zephyrian vessel extending docking protocols. It was a magnificent ship, all flowing curves and crystalline surfaces that seemed to bend light around them. According to the display, it was also roughly the size of a small city and probably carried enough firepower to turn Kepler Prime into an asteroid field. The Zephyrian delegation has requested your presence specifically, Ambassador Chen continued. Apparently, Elder Cylindra wishes to express her gratitude in person. Can't we just send a nice thank you card? I hear their species loves handwritten notes. I'm afraid it's not that simple. They've invoked something called formal ceremony of ancestral debt. Our xenocultural specialists are scrambling to figure out what that means, but preliminary research suggests it's significant. Marcus had a sinking feeling in his stomach. Define significant. The kind of significant that involves binding cultural obligations and potential diplomatic incidents if handled incorrectly. 2 hours later, Marcus found himself in the embassy's formal reception hall, wearing his dress uniform and trying not to fidget, while various dignitaries explained things he didn't understand in voices that suggested he really should understand them. The ancestral debt is one of the most sacred obligations in Zephyrian culture, Dr. Sarah Kim, the embassy's xenocultural specialist, was saying. When someone saves the life of an elder, especially an elder of high standing, the family incurs a debt that must be repaid according to ancient custom. What kind of repayment are we talking about? Money, trade agreements? I don't need anything fancy. A fruit basket would be fine. It's not that simple. The debt must be paid with what the family considers their most precious possession. In Zephyrian culture, that typically means. Dr. Kim was interrupted by the arrival of the Zephyrian delegation. They entered with ceremonial precision, their robes flowing in colors that seemed to shift and change in the light. At the center of the group was Elder Cylindra, looking remarkably better than she had 3 weeks ago and wearing enough jewelry to fund a small space station. Sergeant Marcus Reed, she said in English that was much clearer than Marcus remembered, you have honored my family beyond measure. Today, House Velthara fulfills its sacred obligation. The ceremony that followed was like watching an elaborate dance performed by people who'd been rehearsing it for centuries. There were speeches in Zephyrian that his translator couldn't quite handle, ritualistic exchanges of symbolic objects, and what appeared to be several different types of incense that made Marcus's eyes water. We cannot repay the gift of life with mere material goods, Elder Cylindra continued. The ancestral debt requires that we offer our most treasured possession to the one who preserved our bloodline. That's when they brought out Lyrelay. Marcus's first thought was that if this was what Zephyrians considered a treasured possession, he was beginning to understand their economic policies. The young woman who walked into the ceremony was stunning in a way that transcended species, tall and graceful, with the characteristic pale blue skin of her people and silver hair that seemed to move with its own inner light. Her large, amber eyes held intelligence and just a hint of something that might have been nervousness. This is my granddaughter, Lyrelay of House Velthara, Elder Cylindra announced. She serves as cultural attaché to the Confederation Council and speaks 17 languages. She will fulfill the ancestral debt as your consort. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. I'm sorry, as my what now? Elder Cylindra took Lyrelay's hand and placed it in Marcus's. Her skin was warm and slightly cool at the same time, like touching starlight. Be gentle with her, the elder said softly in English, and the assembled crowd erupted in what was clearly ceremonial celebration. Wait, Marcus said desperately. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I just helped someone who needed help. I wasn't trying to get married. But the ceremony was already concluding around him. Officials were signing documents. Photographers were taking pictures. And Lyrelay was looking at him with an expression that suggested she was having similar thoughts about the rapid trajectory of her life. Ambassador Chen appeared at Marcus's elbow, his face pale. Sergeant, we need to talk, immediately. As the crowd began to disperse, Marcus found himself still holding Lyrelay's hand and wondering how his life had gotten so complicated so quickly. So, he said to her quietly, how are you handling this? I am trying to remember my diplomatic training, she replied in accented English. But mostly I am wondering if it would be considered rude to run away screaming. Would it help if I mentioned that I'm having the exact same thought? Oddly, yes. Ambassador Chen was gesturing frantically from across the room. We need to discuss the implications of this arrangement before anyone makes any decisions they can't unmake. What kind of implications? Marcus asked. The kind that could either cement peace between our species or start the first interplanetary war over a misunderstood wedding ceremony. Marcus looked at Lyrale, who was still holding his hand and looking like she was trying to solve a complex mathematical equation in her head. Well, he said finally, this is definitely not how I thought today was going to go. You and I both, she replied. Though I should mention, the consortrite is binding under both Zephyrian law and the colonial administration agreements. We are now legally married by the standards of both our peoples. Marcus stared at her. We're what? Married, bonded, joined in sacred union. She paused. Is this a bad time to mention that I've never actually been to Earth? This day just keeps getting better, Marcus muttered. Ambassador Chen was now making gestures that suggested the building might be on fire. Sergeant Reed, we really need to discuss this situation. I think, Lyrale said thoughtfully, we are about to discover exactly how much trouble one act of kindness can create. Marcus was beginning to suspect she was absolutely right. The briefing room had become what Marcus privately thought of as the war room, complete with enough tension to power a small fusion reactor. On one side sat the human delegation, looking like they'd been asked to negotiate a peace treaty while standing on quicksand. On the other side, the Zephyrian representatives maintained their characteristic grace while radiating the kind of controlled displeasure that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Admiral Harrison said, his voice carrying the patience of someone explaining quantum physics to a particularly slow child. Sergeant Reed is now married to a member of one of the most politically influential families in the Zephyrian Confederation, which has disrupted approximately 17 different marriage alliance negotiations and may have accidentally destabilized the government of 3-star systems. That's essentially correct, Ambassador Chen confirmed, consulting his notes with the expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. Marcus sat between Lyrale and Dr. Kim, trying not to notice how the entire situation seemed to hinge on decisions he didn't remember making. Sir, if I may ask, exactly how much trouble are we talking about here? The kind of trouble that starts with diplomatic protests and ends with orbital bombardments, Admiral Harrison replied cheerfully. According to our intelligence reports, Zephyrian hardliners are already claiming that your marriage to Lady Lyrale is part of a human plot to infiltrate their government. And the human hardliners, Ambassador Chen added helpfully, are claiming that your marriage is evidence of alien influence in our military command structure. So everyone thinks I'm a spy, more or less. Lyrale spoke for the first time since the briefing began. If I may clarify the situation from the Zephyrian perspective. Please do, Admiral Harrison said. At this point, clarity would be refreshing. The ancestral debt is not merely ceremonial. It creates binding obligations that extend beyond the individuals involved to their entire bloodlines and political affiliations. My marriage to Sergeant Reed has effectively allied House Velthara with humanity, which has implications. What kind of implications? The kind that my former intended betrothed, Commander Thane Velkaris, is interpreting as an act of war against traditional Zephyrian values. Dr. Kim looked up from her cultural database. Commander Velkaris commands the 3rd Battle Fleet. According to our intelligence, he's been building support among military traditionalists who oppose the peace accords. So my rescue of your grandmother accidentally gave the anti-human faction a reason to justify military action, Marcus asked. In essence, yes. Marcus put his head in his hands. I saved one old lady from falling into a hole. How did that turn into an interplanetary incident? You saved the right old lady, Lyreley said gently. My grandmother is not just any elder. She's the matriarch of House Velthara and the keeper of our clan's political alliances. Her support for the peace accords has been crucial in maintaining moderate government control. Admiral Harrison leaned forward. And now that support is tied directly to her granddaughter's marriage to a human soldier. Correct. If the marriage is rejected or annulled, it would be seen as a rejection of the ancestral debt, which would dishonor House Velthara and likely collapse the moderate coalition. And if the marriage stands, then House Velthara's considerable political influence becomes aligned with human interests, which the traditionalists will interpret as foreign manipulation of Zephyrian politics. Marcus looked around the room at the assembled diplomats and military officers, all of whom were staring at him like he'd accidentally activated a doomsday device. So basically, no matter what I do, someone's going to be angry enough to start shooting. That's a fairly accurate assessment, Ambassador Chen said. There is another option, Lyreley said quietly. The consortrite includes a trial period, 7 days during which either party can withdraw if they find the union incompatible, but the withdrawal must be mutual and publicly declared, or it's considered rejection rather than dissolution. Meaning we have 1 week to decide whether to make this marriage real, or to end it in a way that doesn't dishonor either of our families. Admiral Harrison drummed his fingers on the table, and during this week, we live as bonded consorts, learn each other's customs, and demonstrate our commitment to both peoples. At the end, we either complete the full bonding ceremony or dissolve the arrangement by mutual consent. What happens if we go through with it? You become the first human Zephyrian diplomatic marriage in history, which either cements the peace accords or gives the extremists exactly the excuse they need for war. Marcus looked at Lyreley, who was maintaining her diplomatic composure despite what had to be the most stressful week of her life. And what do you want to do? I want to prevent a war, she said simply. Beyond that, I'm trying to figure out if I can build a life with someone I've known for 3 days, based on a marriage contract I didn't choose. Fair enough, I'm trying to figure out the same thing. Admiral Harrison stood. You have 1 week to make this decision. I suggest you use it wisely. Dr. Kim will brief you on the cultural requirements for the trial period. Ambassador Chen will handle the political implications. And Sergeant Reed. Yes, sir. Of course there is. Marcus laughed despite himself. Well, we'd better get started. We've got a week to either save the peace or accidentally start a war. No pressure at all, Lyreley replied, and Marcus was relieved to hear what might have been humor in her voice. Just another day in the life of a combat medic, he said. Though usually when I'm trying to save lives, I don't have to worry about whether I'm politically compatible with my patients. Perhaps, Lyreley said thoughtfully, we should start by determining whether we're personally compatible. The politics can wait until we know if we can stand being in the same room together for more than an hour. Marcus considered this. That's probably the most sensible thing anyone said all day. Don't sound so surprised. I am trained in diplomatic strategy. Right, so where do we start? With the most important question, Lyreley said seriously. Do you actually want to try to make this work? Or are you just being noble about an impossible situation? Marcus thought about it, studying her face and trying to separate his attraction to her from his sense of duty. Honestly, I'm terrified, but I'd rather try and fail than not try and always wonder. Good, she said, and for the first time since the ceremony she smiled. Because I feel exactly the same way. The week passed faster than Marcus had expected and slower than he'd hoped. Learning Zephyrian customs while teaching human traditions to someone who analyzed everything through the lens of diplomatic strategy was like trying to dance while solving calculus problems. but somehow they'd managed to avoid stepping on each other's feet too badly. "You realize," Lyreley said on the morning of the seventh day, "that in approximately 6 hours we have to make a decision that affects the political stability of two civilizations." They were sitting in the embassy's observation lounge, watching Kepler Prime's twin suns rise over the rebuilt marketplace. Marcus had discovered that Lyreley liked to think out loud when she was processing complex problems, which was convenient since he tended to work through things by talking them through. "I've been trying not to think about it," Marcus admitted. "Every time I focus on the political implications, I get overwhelmed, so I've been focusing on the personal implications instead." "And what have you concluded?" "That I like you. A lot, more than I probably should after knowing you for a week." Lyreley turned to study his face. "What is it that you like about me?" "Your mind. The way you approach problems from 3 different angles simultaneously. The fact that you ask direct questions instead of dancing around uncomfortable topics. Your laugh, when you let yourself actually laugh instead of doing that diplomatic chuckle thing. You've noticed the difference. I'm observant. It's part of being a medic. You have to read people quickly and accurately." "And what do you read when you look at me?" Marcus considered this carefully. "Someone who's spent so much time being what other people needed her to be that she's not entirely sure who she is when nobody's watching. Someone who's brilliant at managing other people's problems but struggles with her own. Someone who's lonely in a way that has nothing to do with being surrounded by people." Lyreley was quiet for a long moment. "That's surprisingly accurate. Am I wrong?" "No, which is somewhat terrifying, considering we've known each other for a week." "What do you see when you look at me?" "Someone who makes decisions based on what's right rather than what's safe. Someone who's more afraid of failing people than of dying. Someone who jokes to avoid dealing with his own emotions but still feels them deeply." She paused. "Someone who saved my grandmother not because it was his job, but because he couldn't stand to watch someone suffer when he had the power to help. And someone I could fall in love with, if we had time and circumstances weren't so complicated." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. "Lyreley, what if we made time? What if we took the complications and made them work for us instead of against us?" "You mean go through with the full bonding ceremony?" "I mean make a real commitment to building something together. Not because politics requires it, but because we want to see what we could become. The risks are enormous, but so are the possibilities." Marcus reached for her hand. "I'm not asking you to choose duty over desire or politics over personal happiness. I'm asking if you want to try building a life where we don't have to choose." Lyreley was quiet, her amber eyes reflecting the morning light as she worked through the implications. "There's something I haven't told you about why I was originally assigned to the Kepler Prime negotiations." "What kind of something?" "I requested this assignment specifically because I wanted to study human approaches to relationship building." "Why?" "Because traditional Zephyrian courtship is entirely about political alliance and genetic compatibility. Individual preference is discouraged. I wanted to understand how humans manage to build partnerships based on emotional connection and personal choice." Marcus stared at her. "You were researching human romance. Academic interest in cultural differences. Though after this week, I'm beginning to understand the appeal of your approach." "Which is?" "You ask what I want, not what my family needs, or what's politically advantageous, or what serves the greater good. You ask what I want." "So what do you want?" Lyreley smiled, and this time it wasn't her diplomatic expression. "I want to find out what happens when two people from different worlds decide to build a new one together." The bonding ceremony took place that evening in the embassy's main hall, with representatives from both governments in attendance. Marcus had been nervous about the formal aspects, but Dr. Kim had walked him through the requirements: exchange of personal histories, declaration of mutual commitment, and the blending of traditional ceremonies from both cultures. What he hadn't expected was how natural it felt. When Lyrale spoke her vows in English, incorporating human concepts of partnership and individual choice into Zephyrian ritual language, it felt like watching two different philosophies merge into something entirely new. When Marcus responded by pledging himself not just to her, but to the values they would build together, he saw tears in Elder Cylindra's eyes. The political response was swift and complex. Moderate factions from both species praised the union as proof that cooperation could transcend species barriers. Traditionalists predictably denounced it as either human manipulation or alien infiltration, depending on their particular prejudices. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Younger members of both species who saw the marriage as proof that the future didn't have to be constrained by the limitations of the past. "We're getting requests," Ambassador Chen told them during their first briefing as a married couple. "Young people from both species want to know about cultural exchange programs, educational partnerships, joint research projects. Your marriage has become a symbol for people who want something different." "Different how?" Lyrale asked. "Different like choosing cooperation over competition. Different like building bridges instead of walls. Different like believing that we can be stronger together than we are apart." Marcus looked at his wife, still strange to think of her that way, and saw his own wonder reflected in her expression. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now you two become the first joint human Zephyrian diplomatic team," Admiral Harrison announced, entering the briefing room with what might have been a smile. "Congratulations. You're now responsible for establishing the framework for interspecies cooperation that doesn't depend on accidental marriages." "No pressure," Marcus muttered. "Actually," Lyrale said, squeezing his hand, "I think we can handle the pressure. We've had good practice." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same observation lounge where they'd made their decision, watching the first joint human Zephyrian research station take shape in orbit around Kepler Prime. Lyrale was beside him, working on proposals for the cultural exchange program that had grown far beyond anything they'd originally imagined. "Any regrets?" she asked, not looking up from her tablet. "About accidentally marrying the most brilliant diplomat in the Zephyrian Confederation? Not a single one." "Good answer. Though I should point out that our success rate for preventing interplanetary incidents has improved dramatically since our marriage. That's because we learned to cause the right kind of incidents." Lyrale laughed, her real laugh, not the diplomatic one, and Marcus realized that the best decisions weren't always the ones you planned to make. Sometimes they were the ones you made when someone needed help, or when the universe presented you with impossible choices, or when you had to decide whether to build bridges or walls. "Elder Cylindra sent another message," Lyrale said. "She wants to know when we're planning to give her great-grandchildren. Tell her we're still working on mastering interspecies diplomacy. Interspecies reproduction might be a bit advanced for us right now." "I already did," she said, to practice more. Marcus grinned. "I do like your grandmother. She likes you too. She said saving her life was the second best thing you ever did." "What was the first?" "Learning to love her granddaughter properly." As the research station's lights began to twinkle in the darkness, Marcus reflected